Hey everyone, it's Mike Huber, founder and CEO of the Freshman Foundation. Every high school athlete gets excited about finally arriving on campus. Becoming a collegiate athlete is the ultimate reward for all the sacrifices you've made for 10 plus years to get to this point. However, ask any athlete what it was like to make the leap to collegiate athletics, and they will tell you it is hard, and not only on the field. In private moments, high school student athletes might ask themselves, am I truly ready to make the leap to college? The parents might ask, is my child truly ready to handle life on their own in college? It is absolutely normal to ask these questions. However, that doesn't make you feel any better if you don't have the answers. What if you had a playbook to help you answer these questions before you arrive on campus? The Freshman Foundation Digital Playbook helps high school athletes be ready to dominate the leap to collegiate athletics. The Freshman Foundation is an interactive digital resource to help you prepare to answer the hard questions before you get to college. Your investment in the Freshman Foundation Playbook will help you avoid giving away your first year of college and will help your parents avoid losing sleep at night. Visit michaelvhuber.com/course to learn how you can be ready to dominate the leap to collegiate athletics. Now let's get on to the podcast.
Welcome to the Freshman Foundation Podcast, helping you make the jump from high school athletics to the collegiate level and beyond, with your host, Michael Huber.
How did Natalie Heim navigate the transition to college athletics? Welcome to the Freshman Foundation Podcast, where we help young athletes become confident problem solvers in sport and life. My guest in this episode is Natalie Heim, a Division I swimmer and mental health counseling graduate student at Seton Hall University in South Orange, New Jersey. Natalie shares openly about the challenges that she faced in becoming a big-time college student athlete. She discusses her experiences dealing with injuries, her recruiting process, mental health challenges, and transitioning through COVID. I'm excited for this conversation. Let's build your foundation with Natalie Heim. Hey, Natalie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing great. So Natalie, for those listening, is a student athlete at Seton Hall University, where she swims, and she's also entering her graduate program in mental health counseling. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
All right. So tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, so I am a Seton Hall student. I've been for the last 4 years, and I'm going into a graduate program, mental health counseling, for the next 2. So I'm really excited. I was a social and behavioral sciences major with minors in psych and sociology, and I've been an athlete since I was 6 years old. So a long time. So always a swimmer.
Yeah. And just to give a little bit more background. So Natalie and I got connected. She's helped me with some stuff professionally in my practice, and given her background and some of her experiences, I thought it'd be a great conversation for us to have. So you mentioned you kind of started swimming around 6. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So tell me about that. When you started swimming, do you remember what you liked about it?
So I started actually when I was 3, but competitively when I was 6.
Okay.
I did a summer league when I was, I think, 3 or 4 years old.
Okay.
And then I started competitively because my summer league coach told my mom, she's like, you have to get her into swimming. She's really good. So I don't always remember her that young, but growing up, it was always a huge part of my life. My family, all of us are swimmers besides my mom.
Okay.
So it's a huge talk in our house. I grew up swimming for the same team since 6 to, I think it was 18. So my whole life.
All right.
Yeah.
All right. So at what point did you start to realize personally, hey, I'm pretty good at this?
That didn't come till I was probably in high school, I'd say. I had an injury, actually. I tore my hip flexor, and I kind of at that time was not fully enjoying swimming as a sport. I wasn't happy with it. I didn't have a stroke that I was very good at. And then following that event, I kind of had to take time off from the sport, and I realized how much it meant to me. So then after that, I kind of started to become a freestyler, and I got a lot better in the years probably between my freshman year and then my senior year of high school.
Okay.
So that was kind of when it became a really important part of my life, and I knew that I wanted to continue it in college.
Okay. How old were you when you tore your hip flexor?
I believe I was 12 or 13.
Wow.
I used to be a brushstroker, so that was, my foot was kind of adjusted in a weird way. So then I ended up it was a micro tear, but it was still, it kept me out for a whole summer season.
That's a pretty rough muscle to tear, even if it's a small thing.
Yeah, it was rough.
Okay. So how long were you out at that point?
I think I was out for a whole season.
Okay. So like how many months is that?
It was from, I'd say, it was only the summer season. So it was probably April to almost August.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it sounds like from the way you explained it, like that time away made you realize how much you really liked to be a swimmer.
Yeah. Cause I realized like not having it every day, not going every day, and then watching all my friends still train.
Okay.
It kind of put it in perspective to me how important it was in my life, and how the kind of discipline and structure kind of made me who I am.
Okay. Yeah. We were kind of talking about this before we started recording, that idea that if you don't have that sort of structure, sometimes it's hard to like be accountable. And that structure actually is really desirable. It's actually something you crave. Yeah.
It was something that I really missed, and I can't even imagine now not having it. And I know when I graduate and I'm done with swimming, it's going to be quite the adjustment for me.
Yeah.
But I think it gave me a lot of good qualities of like dedication, time management that I wouldn't have gotten if I didn't continue the sport.
Yeah. I think we'll talk more about that as we move on here in terms of like what it might look like when you're done. Which obviously is, kind of a theme of this podcast is about transitions, whether it's from high school to college or college to out of your sport retirement. So we'll talk more about that. But okay. So like, do you remember what changed after you came back from the injury in terms of the way you approached the sport?
I don't remember exactly what changed, but I had a very rough start getting back in. I remember I couldn't kick for a while. I had to use a pole buoy, which is something you put in between your legs to make you float. Yeah. And so it was quite the adjustment. I had to be really careful with how I was pushing off the wall. I couldn't dive off the blocks for a little while. So I kind of worked more technically on my stroke and focused on that. And then everything else kind of came after that.
Okay. But like, did your motivation change? Like as you're going through sort of those, it sounded like you had to be really patient in terms of coming back and recovering and sort of building yourself back up. Did you feel like you had that like extra more motivation to go and like approach it in terms of getting back into it rather than feeling like, oh, I'm frustrated because this isn't going as fast as I wanted to? Yeah, definitely. Because I definitely took it the sport for granted before the injury. And when I came back, it did put it in perspective for me that I'm not going to have this forever. And I realized that in order to enjoy what I'm doing and have that like excitement in the sport, I'm going to have to be motivated to continue it, because you don't want to just show up and just be there. You have to show up and do everything that you're supposed to and want to be there, because that's going to make the experience more fun. Yeah, but I think the injury, and it's not something I think we've talked about up until this point, but I think injuries, athletes immediately assume injuries are a bad thing, right? When you're going through it. But there's a lot of good that can come out of being injured. I think a lot of times, especially if it's not something that's career ending, right? Yeah. Learning how to be resilient, learning how to work on things away from your sport that you wouldn't otherwise prioritize because you're away from it, but also like getting that love back of be like, oh my God, I miss this. Yeah. Like now I want to go back and really rededicate myself because now I see the other side of it. Like, I don't know what I would do without it. Right. Sometimes we just take it for granted and we just keep going and we don't realize how like important it is to us until we actually stop. Yeah. And I feel like a lot of athletes also kind of reach a point of burnout at least once in their career. For me, it's happened maybe twice actually. So, it's definitely difficult when you kind of don't want to show up and you don't want to be there, but kind of having that mental toughness to show up and say, I belong here. I want to be here. I can be resilient in this situation. That was something that was so helpful for me after that. So at what points did you feel burnt out, or have you felt burnt out?
Before that injury, definitely,
Okay.
I was burnt out, and I was young, so I didn't know that was burnout at the time, but
Right.
I wasn't
Right.
enjoying what I was doing at all. And then in college, I'd say I was also injured last semester. I had a back injury, and I came off of a really good season my junior year. And then coming into the next year, I wasn't in the shape that I needed to be to do the same thing that I did the year prior. And that became something that was very tough for me because I wasn't really enjoying what I was doing anymore. I didn't feel like I was getting like the proper, I guess, training. Not proper training because I was receiving good training, but it was more or less I wasn't putting in the effort I needed to because I wasn't really mentally there, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does make sense. And I can't even imagine because I've never been a competitive swimmer. I mean, the amount of discipline that's required to like consistently over, I mean, in your case, from the time you were 6, generally until now, which you're 23, 22?
I'm 22, yeah.
Yeah. So 16 years of that, more or less straight through, like every single day getting up at 5 a.m. to get into the pool and sometimes twice a day and all these other things that you do. Like it does take a lot of discipline. I can't imagine that there aren't times where you don't question like, hey, what am I doing here?
Yeah. And then when you're also surrounded by some people who kind of have that same mindset of, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, it makes it a lot easier for you to also say the same thing, which it stinks, but it happens a lot on a team environment.
Absolutely. Yeah, we could talk more about that. I wasn't planning on going there, but I think it's really actually a really important conversation to have because, it's something I talk about in my own work, with when I'm working with athletes and, individually is like, you don't control the people around you, but they can certainly influence the way you look at your sport and that can affect your performance. So how can you create the conditions, the kind of bubble around yourself to not let that seep in as much so that you don't get poisoned by it?
Yeah.
Because it can.
It's
very, very easily.
Yeah.
It can happen very easily. So at what point did you start thinking about swimming in college?
I remember, I don't know what year I made this cut, but it was probably my sophomore, maybe junior year of high school. I was going for a national cut, which is basically the highest level that you can get, or one of the highest levels that you can get in YMCA swimming. And I remember my dad was at the meet that I made the cut at, and he was like, if you go this time, I think he had like some sort of ring on his finger, and he was like, I won't take this off until you go that time. And then I swam and I went that time immediately. And that was when I kind of realized that like I had potential to take that somewhere and use that as a career in college. Because it was the first time I kind of had a moment where I realized that I'm in a place that I can, I guess, I don't know the word for it, like be better than some other people, but not in like a rude way. Just, I feel like I'm stuttering a little bit.
No, you're going to keep going.
I just feel like that moment, my dad seeing him so proud too, I wanted to continue doing that because I felt like it made me happy, and then it made also others happy, and it meant something to us.
Yeah. Yeah, but there's a lot, and I think, it's, you preface it as like, it's not in a rude way. Like we get our motivation from competing with other people, at least on some level, right? Like some of it's internal, it has to be, right? If it's not completely, if there's not some level of internal motivation, you're going to burn out.
Yeah.
Because now you're trying to get all of your motivation from the outside, which you don't have any control over. But at the same time, as a high level athlete, right, we get our motivation from the environment, people around us. Am I swimming better than this person? I'm competing against them. They're giving me the will and desire to push harder. And now I'm getting a result that makes me feel good. If I don't get the feedback, it's really hard to keep going unless I love something so much that I don't need any of it, right? So like, it's not something necessarily to like, I don't say feel bad about, but like almost like to have to like caveat it.
Yeah. And I think that was a large part for me was I still always want to make my parents proud because they did everything for me when I was younger, and they still do everything for me now. So that kind of a moment was similar to just the overall high school experience as well. It almost like the sport kind of gave me a promise of validation almost for that feeling of happiness and that feeling of being the big fish instead of the
Yeah.
small fish because I was always the small fish growing up. So I feel like that promise of validation of the happiness and the excitement was what
Yeah.
drove me. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when, I mean, you could say small fish, you could say kind of average size fish. But yeah, like you put in all that work, eventually, like if you get to the place where you're the bigger fish, it's going to
Mhm.
feel good,
Yeah.
right? Like just to sort of support the idea that I put in all this work for a reason versus like, why am I doing it?
Yeah.
Right. And so like, at what point did you start to get recruited off of that?
I think it must have been my junior year because swimming, we only are allowed to start our junior year of the recruiting process. And I remember my junior year in the summer, my team had won nationals.
Mhm.
And that was when everyone kind of started reaching out. And then I started going on visits. And I wasn't satisfied with most of the visits just because I knew I was going to be kind of a really small fish in their ponds.
Okay.
Like in college swimming, if you aren't the best at the bigger schools or you're training for the Olympics, like you don't get that kind of shot
Mhm.
at greatness basically because
Yeah.
you're kind of left on the back burner. So with Seton Hall, I kind of felt like I was going to be in an environment where I can continue growing as an athlete.
Okay. So like without, without getting too detailed or naming names if you don't want to, like what were some of the alternatives, the bigger alternatives? Like what conferences were you looking at?
Big Ten was majority of the schools I looked at.
Okay.
And, that's Penn State, Michigan. So all those schools are kind of the schools that train like possible Olympians
Mhm.
or like kind of that stuff. So I knew I wasn't going to get to that level
Okay.
at that point in time. At least I didn't think I would.
Okay.
Maybe NCAAs, but I just
Mhm.
knew that I would kind of struggle there mentally, but also physically I don't think I would struggle to keep up, but I think I would struggle with the adjustment of kind of being
Mhm.
the small fish.
Okay. What were some of the other things outside of swimming that you were looking for in a college?
At the time, I was looking for a team that I can bond with because that was the most important part to me. I went to a lot of the schools that I was visiting, and a lot of the schools had teams that were very disjointed and they kind of seemed separated, cliquey.
Mm-hmm.
And I did not want that because I feel like when you train, especially as a swimmer, with a team that's disjointed, it's very hard to keep yourself wanting to go every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted a group of friends instead of just teammates. Like I wanted to be close with everyone, and because that would make the team easier to succeed or
Mhm.
have an easier time succeeding. And that was definitely a huge part of what made my decision.
Okay. So how did you figure that out, right? Obviously, you're going into the recruiting process, like you're getting only a certain amount of information, right? Like
Mhm.
the coaching staff's trying to obviously encourage you to come there. You're going on visits, you're meeting some of maybe your fellow recruits, but you don't have complete information at that point. So like what gave you the sense that Seton Hall would be the place that would sort of give you that feeling?
Yeah, you can just tell when you go
Okay.
to a school. Because we go on, well, back then we would go on recruiting trips for
Mhm.
2 days. So I'd spend a lot of time with the team.
Mhm.
And you can kind of tell when everyone's friends. I mean, not everyone's always going to be friends, but you can tell when everyone gets along or if they don't. And I feel like a lot of the bigger schools, they felt like they didn't want us there sometimes.
Okay.
And at Seton Hall, you felt wanted. You felt like everyone was excited to have you there.
Mhm.
And that was like really important to me because you
Cool.
can see that would be how it was going to be for the rest of your 4 years.
Yeah. That's great. Yeah. And I guess you're right. Like anything else, right? You got to trust your instincts
Hmm.
sometimes. So at what point did you commit
I committed in October. It was like end of
of
October.
your senior year?
Yes. And it's funny because Seton Hall was not my first choice at all. My mom actually made me look there and she was like, you have to go, it's close to home, just look. And I was like, I know I'm going 4 hours away. I'm not going to be any closer than that. And then I went there for the visit and I loved it. And I was not expecting that, but it was a pleasant surprise. And then when I came home, I think I committed like 3 days after visiting. Or
Yeah.
it was very short after.
Sure. That's such a mom thing to say.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually kind of surprised that you like didn't like stubbornly resist it just because she suggested it, right?
Yeah, no, my mom and I are very close, so
Okay.
it definitely wasn't because of that. I for some reason I feel like everyone always thinks they want to be far from home,
Yeah.
but it was definitely a blessing that I did choose the school because I love being home. I'm a homebody. I'm very close with my family, so it was a good choice.
Awesome. So you commit in October of your senior year, and then so you're there. You started in August of the following year, so less than a year later. What was the biggest eye opener for you when you got onto campus?
Well, that was COVID time, so
okay.
yeah, so everything was very eye opening because before that we kind of just were stuck inside. I didn't have school, didn't have anything. We were wearing masks all the time.
Yeah.
So I think at that time it was very shocking to me to see not many people were on campus. So we were kind of it was mainly athletes walking all over campus. So that was definitely eye-opening for me because I felt like we were the only ones who were there. Yeah, and we needed to be there all the time. So that was definitely interesting.
Were you getting tested a lot?
Yes. We were getting tested, I think, once a week. Maybe it wasn't that often, but we definitely got tested every now and again. Yeah.
Yeah, because I talked to other collegiate athletes at that point who were sort of in the same bucket as you. And I heard that they were like getting tested all the time. And they were the only ones that were literally on campus, like only athletes.
Yeah, that's what it seemed like. I mean, we have a lot of commuters, but it seemed like we were the only ones there. We couldn't even use our locker rooms because they didn't want us being too close to each other. We had to go to class in our suits. We would be the only ones sitting in the classroom because everyone else would be virtual.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah, it was weird.
So like, how do you think that affected you athletically? Like, how did it affect your development, or did it?
I had a pretty good freshman season. However, we only had one dual meet and then Big East. So we didn't really have much to base it off of. I think our training wise, we were doing a lot less yardage than we do now. So we were also, I believe we were practicing once a day. We weren't doing doubles. So definitely decreased workload a lot. And I feel like we just couldn't do more because there was no way that we could we had to be in pods. We had to only have a certain amount of us in a lane. So we definitely had to decrease a lot of the workload. But then I did somehow have a good Big East meet. I think I dropped like a lot of time in my 200 free that year, which was very shocking because 200 free was not my event freshman year.
Interesting.
Yeah. So it didn't really affect my training. I think I could have probably done a lot better if we had more under our belt, but I think I still did well.
And so, I mean, I didn't even really think about the COVID part of it, although I'm sure we've talked about it before. So like, were there bigger challenges academically and socially then?
Socially, for sure.
Okay.
I spent all my time with my teammates, my freshman class. We didn't really have many options because there was no one on campus besides us. And we didn't really venture out to meet other athletes because you meet them in social settings and we just didn't really have social settings to meet them at. And athletics pushed and pushed for us to be separated. Even from my teammates, they wanted us to never see each other. Like it was tough. So I think socially I didn't give myself the opportunity to kind of branch out, which was not ideal at that time because I'm a pretty shy person. So I wish I would have had that chance, but definitely made it hard.
Yeah, but you're kind of forced to, right?
Yeah.
And I think, as an athlete, actually, in some ways, right? Like if you were just a non-athlete coming in as a freshman during COVID, it's probably even way worse because you don't even have teammates, right? Like you don't even get to be on campus. Like you're missing that whole first year versus at least I'm there with people, right? Like it's a small group. It's different than I expected, but at least we have this group of people we can stay connected to versus like, now I'm going to college and I can't even go to college because they're not letting me go.
Yeah. And we tried our best to make the most of it. Like we would all hang out in the dorms, but we weren't supposed to, but we did. And then, like the senior class, I didn't know them for half of the year, which was crazy because they're on my team, but I didn't see them. We didn't have meets to go to. We weren't lifting together. So that was definitely interesting because I didn't meet them until I was probably halfway through the season.
Yeah. So when things started to go back to normal, right? We could sort of argue what that means, but generally speaking, right? When things started to go back to what you would have expected it to be before COVID, how did that change your experience as an athlete? Did it like make it better or did it make it harder or?
I think it made it better, but it was a lot harder because
Okay.
we went from training once a day. I don't even know if we would probably go for like an hour and a half. I don't think we'd ever do 2 hours, to going 6 days a week. 3 of those days would be doubles, so 2 practices, then lifts on top of those 2 practices, and then Tuesdays and Thursdays we would also do like 2-hour practices. So that was definitely an adjustment because I wasn't used to the doubles. At high school, I only did them for a week during Christmas, so it wasn't something that I was used to doing all week. So I think it was definitely an adjustment, increasing that workload after the freshman year. Yeah.
So did that increase in volume? I mean, I don't even know if this matters. I'm just curious. Did that increase in volume lead to any sort of physical consequences? Meaning, like, was it harder on your body? Did you get injured, or like, did you adjust to it pretty well?
I guess I adjusted to it pretty well. I think I had a harder time adjusting with it. I didn't do as well my sophomore year of college. So I think that maybe I was struggling with balancing everything. And then also because I was having a very tough time in school as well. But I think I didn't balance everything well. So then I kind of wasn't prepared for our final meets.
Okay. So how did you, I know this is kind of a big question, but like, how did you ultimately figure how to balance, or how did you figure it out where you started to be like, okay, like school's really hard. Now I got more volume. This is really hard. Like, how did you sort of work through that to figure out this is how I need to handle it to get the most out of it?
Yeah. So I had a lot of experiences with mental health throughout my career, but I, sophomore year, had gone through the kind of mind-body disconnect that we saw Simone Biles go through. And gymnastics is a little different because they call it the twisties, I think. But for me, it was, for some reason, my brain was not wanting to do what my body was doing, or my body wasn't doing what my brain was telling it to do. So I was actually in a point where I just didn't know how to explain it, and I would tell people and they would kind of be like, that doesn't make sense. But it didn't make sense to me either. So I had gone to our sports psychologist group on campus, and I was kind of reluctant to it a little bit because, you know, you never want to ask for that help. But I did end up asking for it, and I had a sports psychologist who kind of taught me little tricks. So mindfulness, she kind of told me, when you're brushing your teeth, just think about the motion of brushing your teeth. And it sounds silly, but it was something that stuck with me for the rest of my, like, I still think about it today.
Yeah, sure.
So kind of being mindful of like what you're doing. And then I kind of found out ways to like kind of cope with, like, if I were to experience that again, or if I was anxious about a meet. And she definitely helped me figure that out a little bit better than I was doing on my own. Well,
first of all, I appreciate you sharing that. And second of all, I think it is hard to ask for help. And I think the fact that you did it is great, right? Because you probably were able to work through it a lot more efficiently and effectively than if you tried to solve that problem on your own. And that's something that, you know, I'm big on, is being able to find the resources that you need and then ask for help. But the mind-body disconnect part, like, give me an example, or what was happening? Like, can you explain that in a little bit more detail? Like, from a swimming perspective, like, what was happening?
Yeah. So it's kind of difficult to explain because a lot of people don't understand it. But I remember I was showing up to practice and I just felt like my flip turns were not working. Like, they just didn't feel right. And then I remember being scared to dive off the blocks because I was worried that it wouldn't, like, I would hurt myself or I'd not dive in correctly. It was just little swimming techniques that just didn't feel like they were working. And my brain was saying, do what you're supposed to, you know how to do this. And then I felt like a 5-year-old who just learned how to swim, and my stroke was like lopsided and my turns were like too over rotated. It just was small things like that.
Yeah. So I don't know if you recall, but was it something that like happened gradually or progressively, or was it something that was sudden that you just sort of like woke up one day and was like, what's going on here?
It was sudden. I remember I had a very tough school year, as I said before, sophomore year, because I was in a lot of very tough classes. And I just remember I wasn't doing well mentally at that time. I just was not happy and very stressed and not sleeping. And I just remember one day I went to practice and I tried to figure out what it was. And then I took like a day, and then I decided to talk to my coach about it. And they were like, I don't know what that means. And then I was like, oh, great. Nobody knows what this means.
Right. Scary.
Yeah, it was very scary because I had never been scared to do anything in swimming. It's not something, I'm not a scared person for like athletics, but I just was scared to swim every day, which is weird because you can't really get hurt in swimming. But I don't know. It was just a different feeling.
So how did practicing mindfulness help you make those adjustments in the pool? Like, what was it about the practice that allowed you to kind of work through it?
Yeah. So my coaches knew what I had told them. But after she had told me that, it didn't immediately just end. I just felt like that way for a little while. I think it took like probably 2 weeks for me to kind of get over it. And I remember I would show up to practice and they would ask me how I was doing and I would tell them I'm still kind of feeling a little bit lopsided. And I kind of would just focus on the motion of my arm in freestyle specifically, going into the water and catching and then pulling and circling around. And then my breathing, I would kind of just focus on like how many breaths I would take in a lap or how many strokes I would take before breathing. And then just the flip rotating, like everything just very technical. I just focused on more. And my coaches knew that I was going through that. So they were on board with it.
Well, that's great.
Yeah. So I wasn't doing like speed work. I was just more focused on technique.
Yeah. Like when you use the example of brushing your teeth, right? When you're brushing your teeth, you're usually thinking about 12 other things. You're not thinking about brushing your teeth. And so when you're really mindful, when you're brushing your teeth, like you said, like you're really focused on those little things that you usually ignore. You're very present to it, right? Sort of what you're explaining in the water is like you're shifting your focus to the process.
Yeah.
Like, how does it feel to actually do this when maybe I'm thinking about the result of, well, what happens if I dive into the water, or what happens if I do this? Now I'm thinking into the future and I'm disconnected from my process, from like really like recognizing my body. Being able to come into that and really get back into that present moment awareness takes the focus off of the bad things that can happen. Now you're sort of reconnecting with your body in the process. And that's great that your coaches supported that, because they could have very easily said like, no, swim faster. Right. And so like now you're taking all that focus off of how do I just, move my body through the water and onto like, oh no, I got to swim faster. And now I'm going back into that focus of, I need a better result or else that's going to probably result in that disconnect coming back.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I think it was something I couldn't understand at first because it's like second nature for me at this point to just do like every stroke, swim the way I've been swimming since I was little. But then it kind of became not second nature. So then I had to kind of almost take baby steps back and just focus on things that I would have focused on when I was very young instead. And just like the technical motion of like swimming.
Do you still practice mindfulness now?
I do. I think after hearing that from a sports psychologist, it became something that kind of stuck in my brain. And I tell my teammates about it too. I tell anyone who's like willing to listen about it, because it's something that people think is so silly, but it works. It works 100% if you practice. And it's even now I still get anxious. I still get like nervous about certain things. I'll just take a moment back and work on that basically. And it always works for me. Yeah.
Well, it's good to know. And I think it's interesting, right? Like we still live in a world where people like, that sounds silly.
Yeah.
But if it works for you, it is a practice. And the more you do it and the more you have that to go back to like just the practice of breathing, right? You said like focusing on your breathing. Like it's really hard to be distracted by things that are outside of your control when you're just focused on your breathing. So the fact that you're continuing to practice it is great, right? Because we all get anxious. We all get stressed out. We all start to worry about the future, or we think about the past. Like, how do we come back to the present moment? Well, there's really no better way than just focusing on like, hey, I'm right here, right now, I'm breathing.
Yeah.
So like looking back now, like as you sort of progressed through college, and now you're going into graduate school, your fifth year, like what skills do you wish you had known or had under your belt coming into college that you didn't have?
I think something that I wish I did have going into college was, as I said, like a little earlier on, I was kind of a big fish in a little pond, because you trained with people you swam with your whole life. They were your town, just like very, you grew up with these people. And then I didn't realize how different it is swimming with people who are from different countries, different states, came from different training regimen. And I don't think I was prepared for that part because who you're swimming with makes a difference, as we talked about. And I just don't think I was prepared to shift the culture of the team that I came from and then go into a new culture. It was very difficult for me to kind of adjust to that.
Okay. But what do you think you could have done to prepare for that? Or could you? I mean, is it something you just have to learn how to deal with when you get there? Because
I guess you could say that's something you learn how to deal with when you get there. And I think if someone would have kind of, I don't know, warned us about it, but I guess I should have expected it because we see who's coming in, we see who's on the team. But I feel like when you just grow up with the same people and you swim with the same people your whole life, you don't really think about stuff like that, how different it would be if you adjusted it. So
but like, you know, I think it's a lot easier to like think about that retrospectively, right? When you're going into college, in most cases, I mean, not everybody's this way, but I'd say by and large, you're really excited about what's to come.
Yeah.
You're focused on the good things that are coming with it. And that's sort of like where I like focus my attention, which is like, like we're going to something new and this is really exciting. I've been working for this for however many years. And now I finally have gotten, and I'm going to go to college to swim. That's great. But we're not really preparing for like what could go wrong. Or what's going to be hard. We're thinking about all the good stuff. Now we get there and like all the good stuff that we imagined may not happen at least right away. And now it's like, okay, well, now how do I shift my focus to how do I solve these problems when I wasn't thinking about it, right? It's not because you couldn't have prepared for it, just you didn't know to, you weren't aware.
And I think leading off of that part, I think something else that I would have liked to know or have kind of been guided to before going to college was asking for help and seeking out resources and all that. Because everyone says like they all tell you to do that. But I feel like as an athlete, you grow up kind of being told, suck it up and don't, you know, be worried about that. And you're fine. You'll be fine. And I feel like I didn't, going into college, I felt weak. Definitely asking for any sort of help, whether it was mental health or with our trainers, because you don't want everyone to look at you and be like, oh, she's got a problem. So I don't think I felt comfortable asking for that. And I don't think the resources were highlighted as well. Because in high school, our parents did everything for us, at least for me. Middle school. So I always had them to kind of help me get there. And then when I got to doing it myself, I wasn't very confident in reaching out.
I mean, that kind of highlights a couple things for me. One is like, you know, I think most people are that way regardless of whether you're an athlete or not. I think first of all. I think second of all, like we have to learn the hard way sometimes. Like, you know, like it's not until we're really motivated to look for help because we really want to solve a problem. Like with what you went through mental health wise, like you're at a point where like, I can't do this on my own. I had that same experience myself, right? Like when I got to a point where I like, this is so uncomfortable and so unsettling and scary. Like I can't do this by myself. Like, okay, now I'm motivated to go ask for help. But up until that point, it was like, no, I'll figure it out on my own. Just because there wasn't an urgency, at least in my mind, versus like, well, if I just head this off at the pass and do it proactively, then I don't have to get to the point where I'm like so desperate for help that I have to go looking for it. You know?
And I had a coach growing up who I loved him, but he would kind of not even let you miss practice even if you were like hurt. So you kind of I internalized that feeling of being weak if you had any sort of problem and well, you can get through it. If you are still hurt, you can still do it. You can still show up. And so that kind of was not very effective in helping me ask for help that I needed.
Yeah. We learned that, right? And I think a lot of us learn that, like, hey, suck it up. Like you got to play hurt because you're okay. And we need you to win. And, you know, that's just what we do to be tough. And that's a really like fine line to walk. Right? It's like a tightrope. It's like, well, you want to fight through and be tough and support my team and keep going. But at the same time, if it's going to do long-term damage and threaten my safety and my health, like, do I really need to do this? Like, can I step away? And that's really hard to like square that circle, especially when you're a teenager going to college.
It is.
So as we get ready to wrap up, the last question I'll ask you, and I ask this question a lot, is like, if you had one piece of advice, if you have one piece of advice to share with high school athletes, particularly who are going to go on to compete in college, like what would you say?
I think something that I needed to learn way earlier than I did was kind of give yourself grace, because it's not going to be an easy process. You're going to hit a lot of bumps on the way there, and you're not going to know exactly what to do at every point, because nobody gives you a handbook and says, here, read this, you'll know what to do. So I think I didn't allow myself to give like myself grace, which would have been really helpful, because it's just a lot of times we're very hard on ourselves, especially as athletes. And we kind of need that moment to say, okay, we're doing the best we can. We're trying, and we're going to get there. We just have to put in some extra work to get there.
Yeah. It's a great way to end. Natalie, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it was a pleasure. So, what is your biggest takeaway from my conversation with Natalie Heim? My biggest takeaway is that the road to athletic success is rarely straight and smooth. The ability to succeed requires actively seeking out help and developing the resilience to withstand adversity. I want to thank Natalie for joining me on the podcast and wish her luck during the 2024-25 school year. To learn how mental performance coaching can help young athletes become confident problem solvers in sport and life, visit michaelvhuber.com. Thank you for listening. We'll see you back soon for episode 77.
Mike Huber is the founder and owner of Follow the Ball Coaching, located in Fairhaven, New Jersey. He is a mental performance coach and business advisor dedicated to serving athletes just like you reach their full potential on and off the court. The Freshman Foundation is all about helping you get to the next level. For more information, follow along on Instagram at the Freshman Foundation. Please subscribe. Give us a like on iTunes, Spotify, leave a review, tell a friend. Most importantly, come back in 2 weeks, ready to get better.